Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar, Looking Beneath the Surface. My name is Amanda Goyette. I'm an admin assistant with AERA, and I will be in the background moderating today's event with my colleague, Rob Monroe.
Hey, everybody. Yeah, Rob Monroe here. I look after membership and technical development at AERA, and I want to welcome you to today's webinar. So our next AERA Tech and Skills Conference is going to be P1 Fasteners, and this is out in Rogersville, Missouri on August 23rd. And Rogersville is just minutes outside of Springfield. There's going to be a technical program, there's lunch, door prizes, a guided tour of P1, and this place is an amazing facility, so I'd recommend to get signed up for that one. Also, any AERA members that are going to P1, remember that you get your $75 reimbursement, and so that applies to the shop, and that's through our Engine Rebuilders Educational Foundation, and we reimburse you that $75 fee if you go to that. So look forward to seeing everybody there at that one. All right, well, enough chit chat out of me. Like I mentioned, we've got a powerhouse lineup here for you today. We've got Charles Navarro, Lakespeed Jr., and Mark Malburg, and it's a huge treat to have these gentlemen join us. They are a world of knowledge. Again, if you've got any questions, make sure to put those in the questions box, and we'll get them over to these folks at the end of the webinar. So, everybody, how's it going today, guys?
Great, good to be here.
Yeah,
Nice
doing
to
well.
have you on.
Yeah, especially if I get to hang out with these guys for an hour or so. That's always nice, you know.
Exactly. Well, Charles, your screen looks good. Everything looks good on this end, and sound is good. So, like I say, anybody that's got any questions, fire them in the questions box. But I'll let Charles and then these guys do their presentation, and we'll get on with things.
Okay. I'll just we'll go through, introduce ourselves. I'm Charles Navarro. I'm the president and founder of LN Engineering. We do aftermarket engine components, engineer and manufacture them, and primarily for Porsche applications.
So I'm Mark Malburg. I get to work on surfaces of basically anything in the world. So surface shapes and geometry are kind of my life, and started out in the engine world, and I love that I get to spend about half my life in the engine world. So this is good stuff.
I'm Lakespeed Jr., and I'm just here to be the comic relief to these two guys.
All right.
Okay. Well, I'll just move along. Actually, Lake can start right here. Dive right on in.
This is my favorite slide. Now, Mark does hate this slide like slightly, because that's not what it really looks like. Because we drew this so it looks like the trace you can see on your profilometer, right? Foreshadowing, we're going to talk about profilometers today. But that's not really what the surface looks like. Those valleys aren't that deep. You're taking something that's really wide and you're compressing that image down. But this is what you see if you look in TraceBoss. This is what it kind of look like. The whole idea is those valleys, that surface texture, they hold the oil. And as the sign says, I am the motor oil geek. And that's what I love about piston rings and ring seal and cylinder surfaces, is because everything about tribology that I love all comes together and happens right here. That we have metallurgy, we have surface hardness, we have coatings, we've got these textures that are trying to retain oil, not just to be a lubricant, but to also function as that gasket to help create the seal, that final little bit of seal. No different than, you know, if you have a rear main seal on your small block Chevy or whatever, and you got your crank journal, that seal should not actually touch the crank journal. If it does, there's going to be problems. You need the surface tension of the oil to be that last little bit of seal. And that's what we're talking about right here. And this whole area is critically important when it comes to both the performance of the rings and ring seal, as well as the longevity of that seal and longevity of the cylinder bores as well. So yeah, this is to me the foundational piece right here.
I guess I'll let you guys take this one as well.
Yeah, I think I'm going to hand this one to Lake, as you know, how you feel about those three different textures.
Well, I think anybody can use your eyes and see that they're very different. Yeah, that single process, the P-cone, is what people did for decades. And then maybe along the line, some people had this idea that they may have been plateau honing, where they were coming in and touching over it a little bit with something to try to knock those peaks down to have more valleys, but more load carrying area on top. And in today's world, we're really talking about trying to do this more of extreme plateau. And then we've got these other, I'm not sure what we should call them, Mark, that some of these things we're doing are like extreme plateau. They're very odd, very.
Yeah, we're odd, but we're still playing the same games. We're trying to make smooth peaks with oil retention.
Right, and we're adjusting the amount of oil retention based on the application.
Exactly, and I think that's the big lever that we're talking about now is that bottom shape. What if we doubled the number of valleys or tripled the number of valleys in some applications and kept it with that number of valleys in another application?
Mm-hmm. And the key thing here really is that to do those things, to create those interesting textures, we're using a pretty wide variety of abrasives and honing techniques to do that. And while that trace can give you the numbers, it's not always going to tell you what that shape really is. And the reality is there can be torn and folded metal depending upon the different materials. You know, we have everything from traditional gray cast iron all the way to Sumabore, and we got Nicosil and Alusil. We got all these different crazy metallurgy options now. There's so much diversity in what the cylinder material can be that in the end, again, foreshadowing here, you really need to be understanding, using all the tools that enable your eyes to tell you what's going on with that surface, because there can be fake peaks, if you will, that end up being debris. And debris is bad every time. And debris is never your favorite, right? It's funny doing oil videos, people talk about braking. Oh, you need it to have all this debris so everything laps in. I'm like, no, that's a terrible idea. You know, I get it. I know.
But let's put the debris in the manufacturing process, not in the oil.
Well, ask Toyota about debris in the manufacturing process and their recall, right?
Okay, I mean, wash it out with the honing process, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you know, in the old days, right, when we had, you know, hard chrome rings, I mean, there are some, I've seen documents from, it was either Ilmor or I forget which it may have been, that one of the Formula One engine builders, where they had, you know, super hard chromed rings, and if the engine wasn't breaking in, they would put Bonami down the intake just to use it as an abrasive to get it to break in. Wow. But then they had to change the oil and they had this whole flush process to get everything cleaned out. Okay, we're smarter than that now. They're not doing that anymore, right? When they're building one of Lewis Hamilton's engines, they're not pouring Bonami down the intake. Neither should you, by the way, right? Anybody watching, we shouldn't be doing that.
Don't try this at home.
Yeah, don't try this at home, right? There are better ways. We have better materials. We have better understanding of all these things now. And that's really the point of today's webinar, is to show you some of the different ways you can see what's going on with your cylinders, things to look out for, and processes that you can employ to make sure that you end up with the finish you're looking for and it gives you the results you want.
So,
well, I'll jump in here with just kind of a quick review on how we can actually see these things. And it's going to start with a surface finish measurement of some sort. On the screen is an SJ210. It's probably the most common roughness gauge. It's a handheld, portable little gauge. And a couple of notes here that I'd like to emphasize. This is not like a normal gauge, like a dial bore gauge or gauge rings, gauge blocks, things that we think of in terms of gauging. This is actually a pretty delicate instrument. We typically in the field of metrology and that, we refer to this as an instrument, not a gauge. And having that mindset of a delicate, precise thing that needs to be controlled in terms of cleanliness. We don't want the stylus all gunked up. We don't want vibration. We don't want it misaligned during measurement. At the scale of micro inches, everything matters. So as you get into the world of surface finish, and it's exciting right now. This is the most exciting time of my career because there are so many light bulbs going on with people getting the gauges, getting the software, and seeing things they haven't seen before. So I am absolutely, living the dream right now as a surface metrologist. But there's a culture difference when we start measuring surface finish, that it's not a gauge, it's an instrument, it's delicate. So let's slide over to the next slide, if you would, Charles. And that's the inside, we call that the drive unit from the SJ210. So the SJ210 is kind of cool. It's got a computer that kind of wraps around that, and we can put this into a cylinder bore. And better yet, we can build a little fixture around this to mount it securely in a cylinder bore. So these gauges, being precise, need really good anchoring. If you just set it there and hold it with your hands, it's probably going to put more vibration in the data. And the sad fact is, vibration in a surface finish measurement looks like surface finish. It's hard to tell them apart. So you can be really deceived and start chasing your honing process to fix things that aren't even in the surface, they're in the measurement. So last quick note here is the diamond stylus itself is typically a little tiny cone of diamond. That little tiny cone is hard, so it's durable, it's not going to wear out, but also it's hard and it's brittle. So if you measure over the edge of something and then the stylus returns itself back to the home position, those stylus tips do break. So I would encourage you, if you have a crosshatch system, use that little microscope camera to look at your diamond once in a while. See if there's a big chunk of garbage built up on one edge of it, or if the diamond itself has been knocked off. But the diamond is hard to see, and it's really, really, really important, because if we don't have one, we're really not measuring surface texture. We'll hit the next one there. So the last piece of this measurement side of really getting good information is visualizing the information. The numbers themselves aren't going to tell us if you kicked the gauge halfway through the measurement. It'll be a horrible thing in the data, but RK, RPK, RVK may not tell you what's going on. And that was really the catalyst for the TraceBoss, the TraceBoss Plus software, is to help people actually see so they can trust their data better. And even to Lake's point, beyond the numbers, what is really going on. There are problems when we try to describe a surface with numbers. We can't really give a number to that surface on the screen. It takes lots of numbers to describe it. In fact, that may be 30,000 data points, so it would take 30,000 numbers to describe it. The analogy is, have you ever been to a really great concert and tried to describe it to your friends and say, oh, it was awesome, that band just crushed it, they played 105 decibels? There is no number that describes an experience. Same with the surface. So we try our best to put numbers to that shape, but this picture is going to be far more impactful, far more powerful. And even to the extent that when you start comparing pictures rather than comparing numbers, last week's surface looked like this week's surface looks like this, they could have the same numbers. And Lake has had some really great stories about surfaces with the same numbers, but the pictures are different. So we can pick up on that here or later, Lake, if you'd like to touch that.
Well, that's your spot on, Mark, is that's really where the TraceBoss software opens up the SJ210 or whatever profilometer you have to a whole nother level of understanding, because the trace is the thing that's real. The numbers are derivatives from that. So to me, it's like playing the telephone game. It's like, do I want to I can go straight to the source, the trace, and get the real story, or do I want to believe what's been handed down third time someone's told me this? I don't know about that one. done. I may be lacking some key detail by the time it's handed on 2 or 3 times. And
Yeah.
that's really the way to look at it, is especially when you're really trying to fine tune. We all know that to find that next level of performance, it's usually very focused details is where that comes in. And this allows you to see, I mean, a perfect example is you could have a surface that say has an RVK of 70, but what it has is one gigantic valley versus another one that looks more like a comb. It's nowhere near as deep, it's nowhere near as wide, but there's 15 of them all in uniform. Well, I can tell you right now, the one with 15 in uniform is going to be a more durable, better performing surface than the one with the big giant, Grand Canyon stuck in the middle of it. The numbers are the same.
Yes.
Surfaces are completely different in how they're going to perform and live. And that's the whole key. We want a high level of performance, and we want it for a longer period of time. We want our cake and eat it too. And understanding these surfaces and measuring it is the first step in beginning to manage it. And that's why these things are so important.
Perfect. So let's hit the next slide and talk about those numbers just briefly here. So when we talk about things like RK, we're really talking about the core load carrying part of that surface. It's the height of the red zone on this plot. And we might mention RPK as we talk about surfaces. Those are the peaks outside the core. I tend to think of those as the things that are going to go away as we break in the surface. So a surface that might have dirt on it, well, dirt's going to influence our RPK value to an extent. And then RVK actually is talked about as a depth, but it's really, like Lake was saying, it's actually a volume is the way it's mathematically produced. So there aren't any valleys that are as deep as the green zone necessarily, but that green zone on the graph on the left is plotted as valley depth, but it's based on valley volume. So those are parameters that can kind of get us started, get us in the box. But beyond that, next level performance is really all about the picture, making those uniformly distributed valleys of the right depth and the right amount. So this is how we get close, but how we get good is beyond this. So before I transition to Charles here, is going to describe a pretty cool study. Let's talk about what dirt and garbage and cleanliness looks like in surfaces. So if you hit that next one for me, Charles, we're going to go back to the gauge itself for a moment. Now, the gauges we use are typically skidded gauges. That means there's going to be a big radius like a sled riding on the surface, and the stylus is going to wiggle up and down. So on the left-hand side, we kind of see inside your gauge a bit, where the skid, the big blue radius, keeps the stylus in range, and then the stylus wiggles up and down relative to that. If you look at the second image down in that animation, we see the skid, the big blue radius, rising up on some micro booger or debris or particle or whatever. Yes, I am a 10-year-old boy. So when the skid raises up, the stylus has to reach down farther, and the stylus is going to perceive that as a fake dip in the surface. So the top profile graph, we see a piece of debris on the surface, and the stylus reached down farther while the skid was up in the air. That happens when we measure, and our numbers don't really tell us what's going on. Hey, maybe I've got a high RVK. Well, we don't know why. Did my honing machine do that, or did my gauge do that? The bottom graph is the same thing. The skid raised up, but the stylus slides beside the dirt. The stylus has a little narrow path where the skid has a pretty wide path. So the bottom graph is what you might see on your screen when you're making a measurement. And you didn't hone that. That's actually dirt influencing the measurement. So when we're measuring at millionths of an inch, we've got to think about the scale of dirt at millionths of an inch. The particle on the top profile graph is about the size of a smoke particle that your home smoke detector would detect. So an optical smoke detector is going to detect particles about that size. So these things have to be clean. And I think that's a terrific segue to Charles talking about cleanliness.
Well, we'll just start with the basics. We all know that when you're building an engine, that clean, and clean some more. And when you think you're done cleaning, you need to clean it some more. Our biggest issue, so a lot of what we do, we manufacture piston cylinder sets, and we also recondition Porsche engine blocks. And the biggest issue we come across is improper cleaning, followed by fuel wash down, which washes all the lubrication, and it really doesn't matter what you do for cleaning the parts if there's no lubrication there. It's just going to eat itself alive. But cleanliness, at least that one we can tackle today. So as they say, cleanliness is next to godliness, and it is true even for an engine. So what we use to clean these engine components. There's denatured alcohol, hot soapy water, simple green, ATF, Marvel mystery oil, soda blasting. Once I was rebuilding an engine for my wife's car, and I ran the engine block through the dishwasher at home before I actually had a shop. This was years ago, and she's just, make sure you put an extra load in between the dishes was the only requirement there. So, but obviously you want to use something eco-friendly, so you're not etching your aluminum. And then industrial parts washer, again, you want to make sure whatever detergent you're using is safe for the material you're cleaning. And then some sort of lint-free towels. You have Wipe-Alls, you have Kim wipes, both the same brand, an ultrasonic cleaner. And again, what not to use, abrasives, media blasting, anything that might leave a residue or contaminate or corrode the surface. You probably don't want to clean an aluminum engine block with purple power. It's really good for cleaning stains on the concrete, but not so much for cleaning aluminum engine parts. Using red shop rags, they're definitely going to leave lots of lint. You see them in oil filters when people use red rags. You can see all the lint particles in the filter. And then you have to be careful with a lot of the plastics and rubber components nowadays in engines, that a lot of solvents, even brake cleaner, will take those rubber pieces and shrivel them up and make them non-serviceable. And then obviously sometimes you'll have to use some processes that are more aggressive to clean. So here's a few examples, different levels of cleaning. Obviously, so this is what we use in our shop. We have the standard parts washer. Something comes in really nasty, dirty, you're not going to throw that straight into the ultrasonic. You're going to first give it a precursory wash. We have a unit that has a still built into it, so every night it goes bang, bomb, and it cleans itself. So the solvent's always clean. It desludges itself every night. So we use that for heavy cleaning. Then it can go into the jet wash, which has a hot pressure wash, usually runs around 170 degrees. That does a pretty good job getting all the rest of the surface contamination, oil, everything. For fine cleaning, we would use an ultrasonic, but I would not say that we use the ultrasonic as final cleaning. You still have to use some elbow grease. A part coming out of an ultrasonic alone is not considered clean enough. Some people may say it is, but we're going to explore this a little bit further. That is not clean enough. And I know that a lot of people are now using vapor blasters, vapor hones, something that they have various names, but basically it's an aqueous blaster where you have a slurry of glass bead or ceramic bead with water, and you can clean the parts, and it's very effective. It removes everything, but you have to make sure you wash the parts because you will have contamination in coolant passages, oil passages, nooks and valleys. You have to get everything. When you think it's clean, it's not clean. You have to keep cleaning it. So that's something we do use in our facility as well. But like I said, you have to take care to block off passages. And in some cases, like with an air-cooled Porsche 911 engine case, even when we block off oil passages, there's piston squirters in the block. And invariably, one or two of the squirters will stop working. One little bit of contamination got in the squirter. So whenever we vapor blast one of those engine blocks, it's just standard practice that we take the squirters out, clean the block, and then put fresh squirters in. That's to ensure that there's no contamination left behind. So some of the stuff that regularly we see people using, especially with cast iron cylinders or a cast iron block, everyone goes WD-40. Spray, wipe it down with WD-40, and usually they say, yep, that's good enough. Another one that we see people use is gunk. I can remember years ago, people taking gunk to the coin-op car wash, spraying the engine block with gunk, letting it sit in the bay, and then pressure wash it in the car wash bay. I'm sure the EPA would frown upon that nowadays, but I know plenty of people that used to do that. And then brake clean. Obviously, if you're in the state of California, that you can wash your hands with brake cleaner. It's so environmentally friendly there. The rest of the country may or may not have better brake cleaner as long as you're not following California emission standards. But again, that alone is not good enough for a final cleaning.
Yeah, there's 21 states that actually follow California on that. They have to have the non-chlorinated brake cleaner. So I think it's green labeled when it's the non-chlorinated. Yeah, the non-chlorinated works completely different than the chlorinated. They're just two different beasts.
Yep. And then what we have used, what we tell customers for years, is denatured alcohol. The bottle that I just grabbed the picture off of Google Images of just some random bottle of denatured alcohol. But what we use in the shop here, we just go to Lowe's and go buy it. It says denatured alcohol and it says camping fuel. And it's not 200 proof. It's probably closer to 180 would be my guess. Not that any of us are going to be drinking it, but it works all about the same. It does a really good job of pulling out surface contamination that we've even seen after you run a part through the ultrasonic, like an engine block or a air-cooled cylinder. You can go back in with denatured alcohol and still get surface contamination off of that cylinder bore when you've already hit that cylinder with brake cleaner, and not the California stuff, or the ultrasonic. You will still get contamination out. So moving forward, this is something we see often on the left. We've always called this streaking with Nikasil, we've come to realize that, especially after getting a microscope and looking at these surfaces closely, and then coming up with extra processes for cleaning our Nikasil cylinders, that we really believe that some of the streaking that we're seeing is actually surface contamination that is actually being dragged by the piston rings. And we've always also thought that it could be coatings in the piston rings transfer, because it'll usually clean itself up after a few thousand miles. It goes away. And then on the right, we have a less block, so you have an iron bore, and you can clearly see there's some lines in there. And that was from just some random thread that I grabbed a picture off of on a fresh engine build. And obviously there was some sort of contamination, either on the cylinder itself, or on the rings, the piston, or even on an intake component, and just sucked in some dirt particles. Contamination will damage those surfaces. So it's important that we go in there and clean them and make sure they're actually clean. So that's what we're going to talk about here today. So on the left, here's a picture with a microscope showing what is supposedly a clean surface. It's been cleaned with brake clean. And then we went in with denatured alcohol and Kim wipes. And you can see on that random piece of paper that I just wrote 6. So it took 6 Kim wipes with denatured alcohol, scrubbing the same spot until the Kim wipe came out as white as it went in. So that cylinder was intended, as provided out of the box, was intended to be assembled without any further cleaning. So we can see, yes, the cylinder was still dirty. So before and after cleaning. So we've come up with a process that we use, and I'm going to go over that here shortly. But here's the exact same cylinder, and we actually have a holder that lets us position the stylus in the exact same spot every single time when we're taking traces. And we got it with the microscope, it's a little bit harder, but it's very close, but you can visually see with the microscope. And when I did this, I remember texting Lake a before and after picture, and just with your eyeballs, you don't need a microscope. You can see the difference in the surface just with your eyeballs. But we're going to quantify that here shortly. So it's what I call the not so secret weapon. There are a lot of old engine builders that they swear by cleaning parts with ATF or Marvel Mystery Oil. I'd love to know if Marvel Mystery Oil is just ATF that's had some solvent put in it to cut it. But I haven't done that test yet. But for sake of what our processes that we use in our shop, we just use Napa's Finest ATF. And a lot of you probably will recognize what's on the left. It's an automotive grade aluminum oxide Scotch-Brite pad, the very fine ones. And what we have done, so let me go back. So we use a combo of the ATF and a Scotch-Brite pad to clean the cylinder surfaces. And we're going to go into this a little bit further, but what triggered us to go down this road and try to figure out a more aggressive way of scrubbing the cylinders is we started looking under the microscope, and here's an example. You can see one of the valleys in the cylinder is actually interrupted. And if you actually look and actually you can't really see it here, but when we were doing it, you could find multiple valleys that had interruptions in them. And we were going under the hypothesis that there was something folded and torn material filling up that valley. So when that piston ring goes up and down, it's going to break that free and drag it through the bore. And with this, it's Nickel. And Nickel is very, very hard. It's nickel, silicon, and carbide. So the ring's not going to like it. The bore itself isn't going to like it. It's going to leave a mark. And if the particle's big enough, it will actually scratch the Nickel. Cleaning with a Kim wipes and denatured alcohol, no matter how many times or how hard you scrub, we could not remove that with denatured alcohol and Kim wipes. And the other thing that we noticed when we were doing testing, ring testing a few years back, that you could regularly quantify that there was a change in the surface finish almost immediately after you ran a fresh cylinder, even with Nickel. And everyone always said, well, Nickel's so hard, the bore is not going to change. It's the ring that's breaking into the bore. And we'd always find that the bore would change a point or two. So it really did. So something was happening there. So what was that? So going along with a line of the Scotch-Brite with the ATF, we came up with I'm not showing the intro, the first step. The first step, we took the good old Craftsman hand hone, and we took some Scotch-Brite pads and wrapped them around, and it was the most awkward, messy ordeal. But in the initial test, and we just did it on a shop cart with ATF flying everywhere, we figured out, you know what, I think we have something. So we bought just a Harbor Freight cheap parts washer and just filled the sucker with ATF. We made an expanding mandrel. As you can see there, we have them in different sizes for all the cylinders bore sizes that we manufacture. And you basically load in a Scotch-Brite pad into the mandrel, and then hand drill And unfortunately, I don't have a video of this, but we're not going very fast. I'd probably say we're maybe going 20 to 30 RPM with that mandrel, because there's a lot of force you tension it when you're assembling this in the bore, and the drills, you're using every bit of might that drill has with the amount of force that we have preloaded on that. And we use the solvent wand to distribute the ATF, so it's getting a nice constant flow. And one of the things we noticed immediately when we started doing this is the runoff that was coming off of the cylinders was coming out black. So we noticed right away we were actually pulling stuff off the bores that we thought were clean, that we had already done we had done a jet wash, ultrasonic, we had done the denatured alcohol, and we were still getting contamination off. So what we did, we kept going in and we'd run for 30 seconds at a time, come back out, then we'd scrub with a microfiber. And normally we wouldn't use a microfiber in cleaning because it's not lint free, it could leave debris, but we wanted to use it because a microfiber, when you look under a microscope, it has hooks, and we wanted to use that to help pull. And what we ended up finding, that we kept on going back and forth, and at some point we ran the Scotch-Brite with a mandrel long enough that we weren't getting any more contamination on the microfiber. And you can see this block, before we did this test with a microfiber, like I said, we had gone in there with Kim wipes, and they were clean. The Kim wipe was perfectly clean. So obviously that black soot didn't just miraculously, it wasn't like a statue of the Virgin Mary crying or bleeding. That contamination was there. And what we did with the Scotch-Brite and the mechanical scrubbing is we broke that free and removed it. So here's that same cylinder that we had the close-up. It looks totally different without a microscope to the eye, but you can see how bright and shiny that is. And when you do that, we actually found the streaking, when we actually went and ran that, there was significantly less to no streaking whatsoever on the cylinders. So the contamination, that all these years that that people, and it's even outside of the Porsche world, it could be snowmobiles, it could be motorcycles, streaking has always been an issue with Nikasil. And we finally nailed it down that it's a surface contamination issue. And then really the next step here was, could we apply this to cast iron? We don't really do a whole lot of work with cast iron here, since everything we do is aluminum blocks and aluminum cylinders with Nikasil. But I went ahead and bought some VW cast iron cylinders, and we did the same exercise with cast iron to see what would happen. And for those of you who are not familiar with Nikasil, it's a markedly different surface finish. These are from Mark's database of surface finishes, and you can see Nikasil on the left, and then you can see a plateau hone cast iron bore on the right. Nikasil, sometimes to the naked eye, people will go, "Oh, that's too smooth. The rings are never going to feed on that." Well, Nikasil just looks smoother. But then if you put, like Lake mentioned Sumabore earlier, if you put a block, and like Lake has a Boxster that we built a Porsche engine, and we put Sumabore on that aluminum block, and the bores are a mirror. There is no crosshatch, because with that, there's micro porosity, and the oil gets in those pores, and that is what's providing the oil film for the parts to ride on, that tribo film. You don't have valleys like a Nikasil cylinder and a cast iron cylinder. So here's a before and after. So we used the same process with a cast iron cylinder. Actually, we did several cast iron cylinders. So microscope picture. So on the left, that is before all the cleaning processes. And we actually went step by step, and we did just the WD-40, wiping it out. Then we did cleaning it with ultrasonic. with denatured alcohol, and then the final scrubbing. So the next slide, you'll be able to see what each different step of cleaning actually did to the cylinder. And you can see the final on the right, that is after the ATF and the Scotch-Brite, and it is a visually different surface close up. And you can actually see, it would appear just there are more valleys because you've cleared out stuff that was in there from the honing process. So here's a slide. We have the results here. I'll just give like the 30,000 foot overview here, but we really do believe that standard honing processes and the standard cleaning processes that people are using for cast iron is probably not sufficient. The same processes we're using on Nicosil, it does show quite a bit of an improvement. And I would imagine if you were to take two engines, one that was cleaned conventionally and one that was cleaned with the Scotch-Brite and ATF process, that the use oil analysis would reflect that. I would expect to see a lot less iron content in that first initial sample. And probably if you had a magnetic drain plug on there or a filter mag on the oil filter, you probably would see less contamination inside there. I'm trying to, I'm wearing my wrong glass, my trifocals at home. So these glasses are old. So the green one is a Scotch-Brite for everyone looking, if you can't read that, which I can't unless I squint. But yeah, the green line is the Scotch-Brite, and the blue line is just the wiping it out with WD-40. And I'd like both Mark and Lake to comment on these here.
Well, Mark, while we were looking at the pictures, the first thing I thought of, and I think you're the one who mentioned this to me before, is that visual change is because that surface is changing, that the brightness comes from the angles. Expand on that, because I know you mentioned that before.
Yeah, your eye doesn't see depth at this scale. Your stereo vision doesn't work at millionths of an inch. So what you're really seeing with your eye are slopes. You'll see valleys as having a shiny side that reflects, so you say it must be a valley. And when we change appearance at this scale, we're really changing slopes. We're cleaning up slopes. We're maybe, emptying things out where a surface can become more slopey or more distinction between light and dark. The thing I would notice here, just while I have the microphone, is the width of the distributions. Are we actually tightening up the spread? In many cases, the green is a little tighter than the original spread. So the dirt variability is impacting us. All of these curves have an area under them of the same amount, like an area of 1. So as a curve is taller, that means that surface is more uniform across the 4 places that Charles measured.
And which one's the red one, Charles? I can't. My eyes aren't working either.
Yeah, the purple one is ultrasonic, and the red one is denatured alcohol.
Okay.
Yeah. So basically, the big distinction is ultrasonic. You're just shaking the debris out. With the alcohol, with the denatured alcohol, you're using your hand and scrubbing with a Kim wipe. And then the green one being the Scotch-Brite and ATF that were mechanically tensioning. And I don't actually have the data for this here, but we also did try what like you can buy from Goodson, a plateau brush. And we tried several cylinders, and it really didn't do anything to clean out the valleys. It had no effect whatsoever from that standpoint, because we actually had tried them on cast iron as well. I mean, on Nicosil cylinders as well, and that was the first place we tried them, and it really didn't do anything. So the Scotch-Brite had the biggest effect. I can go on now to the Nicosil.
Okay.
So
hold here just for a second. I got a question for Mark.
Okay.
So, Mark,
Yeah.
go back to the Nickel one you just went to. This is a
Okay.
perfect example. There you go. Stop right there. So would it be fair to say that the reason why the one on the right that's bright is that those slopes are more uniform now, that there's less diffraction, whereas maybe ones on the left, there's more variation from maybe that torn or folded or other stuff that's causing it to be more diffuse looking?
Could be. It's tough because if there is any film layer, it adds to blurriness. And also microscopes at this scale aren't uniform in their brightness. So the focusing and the irising inside the microscope does vary. So what I see when I see this on the left, they both have, well, left and right both have the same maximum brightness. But on the left, there's a whole bunch of surface in the gray zone. And on the right, there's a broader range of color, which means there's a broader range of slope.
Yep.
But it's really, I'm way out on an edge. I might have to trade in my metrology card to say that with any absolute, because these cameras aren't, you know,
Right.
metrological cameras.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just so that there's a reference here. So this cylinder, I had on the shelf a set of NOS Porsche 996 genuine Porsche Nicosil aluminum sleeves with pistons preloaded that were made in 1999, and they were sealed when we opened them. And the way that those kits are sold, they're meant you just push the piston back, put the wrist pin through, put the clip in it, assemble it. That they're already ready to go. They're meant not to be disassembled or cleaned. So you can see some lines going through the one on the left. That was us pushing the piston out of the bore because the piston was already loaded. So again, it's the same spot. So we did all the same process again. So we did just wiping it out, then doing the ultrasonic, denatured alcohol, and then the ATF. So on the right, again, that is after we've done all the steps with the ATF and the Scotch-Brite being the final pass. And again, we have the same graphs again. We actually saw there were so many, it was so effective doing this step, because we've always provided instructions to our customers how you properly clean a cylinder. But it's this step, what we've come up with, unless you have the mandrel and a steady flow of ATF and everything to do it, it's almost impossible to duplicate that cleaning by hand. Not to say it can't be done. I had a customer do it, Jake Raby at Flat Six Innovations. He was able to duplicate what we did in 2 minutes per hole with our mandrel. It took him about 4 hours to do 6 cylinders by hand. So the mandrel sure sped up the process, but you could duplicate it by hand. So it is definitely possible, but I wouldn't recommend it. So we actually instituted, after we did all this testing, we actually went back. Every cylinder we manufacture, every block that we recondition, we do this process too. So everything leaves our door with this done, that we believe in this so much. So, and like I said earlier, that we could see the contamination in the ATF running out of the bores, and then you could see it in the microfiber when we went between passes. It was breaking stuff out that wasn't there with Kim wipes. But again, I'll toss this to Lake and then Mark for their comments on what they see here. Oh, you're muted.
Yeah. So it's just a giant difference that, we've talked about this so many times before, one-on-one, and we've seen all these issues. And even when the honing class, Mark, we've played around with the Scotch-Brite style loaded abrasive, and we see the same thing, that regular honing process, and anyone that's been to any of the honing classes knows that, the diamonds are great. And so you use diamonds to hone Nicosil because of the hardness. They're great, but they don't cut cleanly. Let's just say it that way. They tend to leave more torn and folded type metal, and the CBNs are nice for coming over and cleaning it back up. But when you look at the microscope, there's still fuzz, there's still stuff. And like Mark said, that stuff goes away. We've seen that. We've run engines where we put it together, and once you basically run the valves, you pull the bottom out and check it again real quick to see how much things. And a lot of those peaks start coming down just in the assembly process. But within the first 30 minutes of engine runtime, they're all gone. So that the stuff that's highest up that can contact the rings is going to come off. And what this Scotch-Brite mechanical process is doing, it's not changing those valleys. It's not making the valley deeper or anything like that. But what it's doing is it's getting rid of the junk that's left over from the diamonds or the CBNs in that process, cleaning that surface up, thereby putting less junk throughout your engine when you're running it in, because that debris doesn't magically just go straight to the filter. You know, it doesn't say, it's not like getting a, chance card in Monopoly. It's like, go straight to go, do not pass. No, you don't do that. It goes all through your engine. And you've seen that in the other pictures where it's showing the streaking and all these kind of things. So to me, this is a real game changer to see a process that you can do on Nicosil that can clean up the honing debris. And that mirrors that same kind of process we can do with an insert abrasive in a hone on a traditional type, block or liner material with a hone. That there's two ways of getting there. The point is you want to get there because these numbers are conclusive. Yes, obviously we just kind of talked about that honing, the choices of abrasives, the old school abrasives, the vitrified type abrasives tend to leave things cleaner because of the way they processed. But when we go to the modern abrasives that are diamond or CBN, they're going to make things rougher. There's no doubt about it. And especially if you're doing a peak hone surface, there's going to leave a lot more torn and folded metal. We have some videos on that on the Total Seal YouTube channel we did with Dr. Peter Lee and the guys down at Southwest Research. If you want to go see scanning electron microscope images of all this stuff, it'll scare the hell out of you, is what it's going to do. But the reality is, ultimately, you want to stop honing by the numbers. You want to utilize the software to be able to see what you're doing, because it's going to give you better control. And even in that trace, you can see, I think you can really see some of that fuzz in the RPK numbers. And that as you clean it, at that very top, you're going to see a change. The numbers are going to change some, but you really want to do is use your eyes, look at that trace and visualize those differences, because that's a really key thing. We said it earlier, the numbers can lie to you because they don't always tell you the full story, and you want to see that. Go to the next one. Right, so in this case, this is like we mentioned the different abrasives. So there's your 100 grit, and that's a diamond. And then we're coming in with 600 grit CBN. Of course, what Mark did is he moved these, and because the valley's not getting deeper as we do this, right? We're just mowing the grass more. So everything's referenced from the lowest spot, which is the correct spot, because everything below the trace is actually metal. What's above the trace is air. The trace is just the demarcation line between the two. So the 600 grit CBN brought it down, but then we came in with the Scotch-Brite. And the Scotch-Brite, what did it do? It just got rid of the fuzz. Just brought it back down, made that surface more uniform, have greater load carrying ability, still having the valleys to hold the oil, but they're clean now. They're not fake anymore. And the key thing is when you do this, as Charles alluded to earlier, there is a difference in what you see in terms of wear in the engine. Go ahead and go to the next one, Charles. So here's some examples. There's 4 different engines chosen at random. Right, that's one great thing about having a used oil analysis business is we have thousands of samples, and you can, with a little bit of time in Excel, you can go in there and you can do some math, put some queries in there, and it'll just pull up numbers for you. So here are examples that are single grit hones. during break-in. So we got, different amounts of miles here, but there is a consistent theme. Look at those iron levels. And of course, when the iron levels go up, everything goes up, right? So there's other factors. We're not saying that the single grit finish is the only factor involved in these numbers, because none of these numbers are pretty. But there is a common denominator. All of them have a single grit hone. Every single one of them was done that way. And when you look at the iron levels all in the hundreds, and these are all plateau finishes. And those numbers are chopped dramatically. Every single one of these was plateau honed. 2 of those are motors I worked on, and I happen to know that one of them, for example, actually does have the Scotch Brite applied to it, and the numbers go way down when that happens. You're talking about the highest one's 33. The highest one before was almost 300. That's an incredible difference. So what's going on here? The thing is, with that plateau hone, you're just you're getting rid of those peaks. You're getting rid of the junk in the hone, in the process. Therefore, you generate less wear. I mean, I don't think anyone's going to argue that we think that the engines on the second page are going to last a lot longer than the engine on the first page. That extra wear debris isn't a good thing. Back to our Bonami, right? You did it. You put Bonami in your engine by peak honing it and not cleaning it properly, whether you realize it or not. And sometimes when you go even further distances, before you do that first oil change, you're actually making the process, problem even worse, because that debris just stays in the engine. Your oil filter doesn't capture all of it 100% of the time. So this has been really fun, Charles and Mark, to sit down and kind of work through all of this and see it, but then also be able to put up some real world comparisons to see, yeah, it really does make a difference. It's not just something that's theoretical. There's some real practicality here. And of course, as we move along, once you get one thing mastered, you got to go to the next. So you're talking about ring seal and engine performance. The other things you want to do is you really want to step looking at what is that oil ring tension? Because as you change these surfaces, you're going to change what some of that drag is. Then also you want to make sure that you're light tight. All these little details add up. That's, you can sit there and say, well, how much difference does this really make? Well, oil analysis numbers show you make a pretty big difference. But when you put all the small details together, that's where the championship winning performance comes from. There are no championship winning teams in NASCAR, IndyCar, NHRA that are not detail oriented. There's a reason why Chad Knaus, love him or hate him, is in the NASCAR Hall of Fame. And it's because he was a very detail oriented person. He sweated the small stuff, and it made everybody work for him, sweat the small stuff. And if you couldn't deal with that, you didn't work with him very long. But the results, pretty telling.
That's it, guys, for us. Now we can any questions. Let us hand it over to you guys.
Sure. Well, that was a great presentation. We get a lot of cleaning questions on the tech line, and we weren't able to provide some real world solutions like what you provided here. So I'm going to direct people to let everybody know. So that Q3 edition of Engine Professional Magazine, Charles actually did a cleaning article, and he's expanded on some of the stuff that he talked about today. So those of you that are going to be getting your Q3 in the mail, again, this is all covered in there. But like I say, even on the tech line now, we've got a link to this webinar, and we can show people again some, you've given us some of the real world stuff and how to solve it. So I appreciate that. Thank you very much, guys, for sure. Some questions.
Welcome.
Yeah. What if your shop cannot measure surface finish?
You're in trouble. I'm just going to call it like it is, right? I mean, if you're not measuring, you're guessing. So if you're trying to move up the ladder, it's like saying, hey, we don't have a dial bore gauge. Then you really can't hone very well.
Yeah, I get to experience that in my life sometimes, and it's pretty cool, where people have been honing to a recipe, not a result. And they put in this stone and stroke it this many times at this speed and assume they're getting something. And when they see it for the first time, it's fun to watch.
Well, it's funny, Mark, you mentioned that, because just the other day Rob, and whoever asked the question. I'm not trying to be snarky, by the way. I really am. It's just the facts, right? That we had a guy that they build engines in a series where there's not a lot of things you can do to try to get an advantage. So this idea of plateau honing, they wanted to look at it. So they took 3 blocks, or took 3 engines, dyno tested all of them. They're all new engines right from the factory. Took them, dyno tested them, took them all apart, sit in the blocks. They all got honed with the same recipe, the same process. They got all 3 blocks back, put the engines back together, put them back on the dyno. The biggest gain was 16 horsepower on a 350 horsepower engine from one of them. The smallest was about 4. And they're like, we don't understand how can there be much that variation? Well, the reality is we did a process. We don't know what hardness of those blocks were those all 3 blocks the same? Did that process yield the same product? Don't know. Mm-hmm. Also, how out of round, right? There's no whole other discussion. How out of round were those cylinders? Most likely, the one that gained the most had the most out of roundness that the new hone fixed. So again, if you don't have the tools to measure, you're just going to sit there and speculate. And anyone that knows me, I hate speculation.
And I'll throw out there as well that even if you have a profilometer and you're honing, if everything we've presented today, that if you just stick the profilometer in there and all you did was wipe the bore out with some WD-40 or some brake clean, that trace you're getting is not accurate of the actual final finish, the true final finish. So that's something you have to take into consideration when you're actually honing, is that what you think is what you're honing it to, when you actually clean it, might be completely different.
No, good point for sure. All right, so another question that's come in is, in regards to the Nicosil process or coatings, is that more or less what brought about extreme plateau finishing?
I can touch on that. The extreme plateaus were really brought about primarily by the EPA and the diesel industry. People in diesel know that EPA doesn't like diesel things, and to meet the emissions requirements, even in the early 90s, the diesel world has moved to that shape of a surface.
Okay, so in regards to what they call the problem child, the direct injected gasoline engines, such as the newer Honda engines as an example, would it be possible to sleeve the blocks with gray iron sleeves and hone them with a certain RPK, RVK finish to promote better ring seal with better longevity than factory?
I would need to know what the factory hone is. I don't know what they're doing. Not sure if those are Sumabore ones or not. I would say if it is Sumabore, I wouldn't sleeve it because you already have a better surface to work with. But you could probably modify it but you have to know how much is there. There's a lot of variables in what you're doing. The type of fuel you're using, how much fuel you're putting through it, what your ring tensions are. That's the thing that I love about all this, is that it's not one-dimensional. There's not a single answer for all of this. It is multidimensional. You have to understand all the variables in play, what the fuel is, what the injector, like in this case, in direct injection, what's the injector location? When it's standing up near the spark plug going straight down, it's nowhere near as bad in terms of impingement of fuel on the cylinder wall than ones that are laterally mounted, where they're spraying right across. That's a completely different situation. So there's a lot of variables there. I mean, do I think that you could probably come up with a better recipe than what the factory did? Absolutely, because the factory is, Mark's point, is 100% driven by what the EPA wants to do. Like if anyone thinks anything that rolls out of a modern factory today isn't like a big bull being led around by a ring in its nose, you're wrong. The ring in the nose, the little kid dragging around the 3,000-pound bull, is the EPA. That's the fact. In terms of durability, overall performance, what the EPA wants isn't necessarily maybe what you want. Now I might get thrown in jail for saying that, but if you're talking about performance stuff, then you're a little more free to do that.
So in these particular situations, they're asking, would a wider ring package help seal these particular engines?
Not necessarily. No. You don't. It's not about the thickness of the ring. It's really about having proper bore geometry, how much oil we're holding on the wall, what we're doing. It's that complete package. I mean, I typically we've seen as we go thinner, we can usually get it to seal better because pistons move around. If you do look at any kind of FEA analysis of a piston, and it looks like a bird flapping its wings when it's moving. So when you have thinner rings, they can move and conform because one of your main sealing surfaces isn't the face of the ring to the cylinder wall. It's the flat of the ring to the ring groove. When you lose that, it's game over. It will actually tolerate in-gap variance. It can tolerate some out of roundness, but what it will never tolerate is here.
Another question here. There's lots of focus on surface finish of cylinder bores, naturally. Have surfaces with RVK much higher than RPK shown benefit in roller cam follower interfaces? What are those benefits?
Where's Billy Godbold? Mark, you can answer that one.
Short answer is yes. And the long answer is your mileage may vary.
Okay.
I can tell you from working, because I met Mark when I was still at Driven and working with Billy. The first time I ever used any of his software was OmniSurf, working on flat tappet camshaft stuff. Yes, it makes a giant difference when you have a surface that has a higher load carrying capacity. If your surface is all peaks, it's not going to carry much load. And so it's different than a cylinder, but it's not that different from a cylinder.
Right, we've been through studies on my side where surfaces, hey, let's make them smooth because they'll carry more load, and then you've lost any lubrication and they start failing. So you make them rough and they fail in a different mode. So to the question, can an engineered plateaued surface be applied? Absolutely. That was the answer on a camshaft application, for example.
Excellent. Question on cleaning. Can you clean the cylinder with the pad and Sun&'s honing oil?
I would not. I wouldn't even attempt that.
The main reason we use the ATF is that it's basically a carrier for detergent. So the ATF, it's basically a great medium for cleaning. And that's why we tried it, because talking to old guys that have been doing engine rebuilds and with local small machine shops that have been doing this stuff for 50 years. Oh yeah, we clean everything with ATF. What's old is new again.
Well, one of the key things about why ATF would be better for this than the honing oil is that the ATF, in terms of the chemistry, it's going to have that really robust dispersant package that can keep all that fines in suspension. That's what it's designed to do, to keep clutch materials and things like that suspended so the filter and system can take it out. So it's working the way it's supposed to do. But it does that without really surface aggressive chemistries, like active sulfur and things like that. The reason why honing oil smells so bad, typically, if you're using, a traditional Sun& type oil or one of the replacements for something like that, is the active sulfur. Active sulfur can attack the grain boundaries. So you would prefer not to put something that chemically active in when you don't need it to do that.
A couple more questions here. Would ring seating, for the time frame for ring seating, would it be improved with after hone cleaning? I think you guys covered that today pretty much, but
I'd say so. Yeah, I just think that break-in process, as I said before, it's multidimensional, but the closer you can get that cylinder surface to being broken in, because the rings are already pretty much lapped in, that the barrel profile is. That line of contact, that last little bit, that's going to be in the RK, not the RPK. So getting rid of the junk on the top isn't going to slow down your break-in process. The real break-in is that ring face and the RK coming together. And that's done with load. That's done with running the engine under temperature. So I don't think any of this cleaning process would slow it down by any means. If anything, it'd probably speed it up.
Back to cleaning again. How detrimental is the attention to detail for cleaning a diesel, like for diesel engines in a diesel shop, compared to a high performance shop in reference to, let's say, the Scotch-Brite and ATF usage?
Mark, you're from the diesel world. Tell us what to do.
I really feel like, diesel lives in the high performance realm on the highway, probably more than anything on the highway. Because again, EPA and everybody else has pushed hardest in that realm. So I would say if you're paying attention at a scale of 10 in one world, you're going to pay attention at a scale of 11 in diesel. It's a stricter world. Now that's on the highway, in terms of performance applications, pulling, that kind of thing. I still think we're in a performance world. So in my mind, and I think what Charles has hinted at as well, is you're never clean enough. We're going to have to stop at some point. But the people who take it the farthest are going to do the best.
So one last question here for you guys, just to respect everybody's time. We'll ask one more, and then any of the questions that we didn't have a chance to get to today, we'll forward on. But this one is in regards to a BRM brush, or dingleberry as they call it. Does it have similar results as far as removing shards left from honing?
No. Yeah, definitely not. Because it is a type of abrasive. It's also it can knock some stuff down, but it's also creating its own too.
Yeah,
Okay.
some of my experience has been it's introduced more variability as well. It's not as controlled as a stone.
All right, and I've actually got one question
Charles,
for you guys. Just at my
I saw you moving, Charles.
One question for you guys that I get all the time on the tech line. What are you guys using for cleaning engine bearings?
Ah, man.
Any particular go-to wipe, lint-free wipe or anything? It's a question that's come up on the tech line a few times, and I thought I would just talk to you guys while you were here.
I don't have to put bearings in that often, so I'm not the person to ask.
Denatured alcohol and chem wipes. That's what we use and recommend for cleaning the bearings. You just have to be mindful that if you send your bearings out to Calico to get coated, that if you're the denatured alcohol, if you're too, will actually remove some of that coating. So you just have to be mindful of that.
Okay, super. No, thank you. Well, guys, I appreciate your time. I know you all are busy, and to take time today and educate us all. And again, this is going to go out to our YouTube channel, so all the links are going out to everybody that signed up. And if you didn't get a chance to watch this webinar today, make sure you check it out tonight or whenever you get home. Guys, thank you for your time. Always nice to see you and talk to you. And again, thank you very much.
Yep.
Thanks as always for taking time out of your busy day to attend. We really appreciate it. And lastly, you can see the AERA contact info is there. You can reach anyone at the AERA team by calling 815-526-7600, or you can always shoot an email to Rob or myself, and we're happy to answer any questions you may have or pass them along to the appropriate person if it's not something we can help you with. So thanks again, everybody. We truly appreciate you, and we hope you have a great rest of your week.